Rook endgames can be really tough. Recently, I shot a video about the Philidor and Lucina positions, which are very basic fundamental positions for Rook endgames, but in practice, even when you know those positions, it can just be really hard to navigate your way through a Rook endgame. I want to show you an example of this. It's just a small piece of a game that I played yesterday where we got into a Rook endgame and it should have been a draw, but I was not able to draw it. And I think the mistake that I made is actually pretty instructional and could be helpful for you in your endgames if you run into an endgame like this one. So let's dive in. I'm not going to show the whole game because honestly, I still need to analyze it. I need to figure out what went wrong in the middle game and all that good stuff. But we ended up in this endgame, and there were actually 3 chances I had to draw it at this point. I'm just going to show you one because this is the one that I actually understand, and I'll tell you why I don't understand the other ones yet, and I'll probably shoot another video later to dig into those. But this is the position, and the move that I played was Rook F5. Now, my thought process was as follows. I am attacking this pawn, probably going to win it, and I'm also defending my pawn. And my thought was, let's see, that something like this might happen, you know, G6, and then, no, not G6, I'm sorry. That's what happened in the game. Right, so I'm not going to win that pawn because it's going down here. What I thought was going to happen was something like King B4, and we were going to essentially trade these pawns. So I was going to take here, White was going to take here, I was going to go up like this, and I was going to get my rook behind the pawn like this. So basically, we were going to trade off the pawn that was here and the pawn that was here, right? And I was going to get my rook in behind this pawn on the edge of the board, or the rook's pawn, as it's called. The reason I thought this was going to work is because I'd been studying a little while ago some of the theory in rook's pawn endings with rooks on the board. That's a little bit confusing to say, but there is an end game with this pawn on the edge where getting your rook behind it and actually having your king over on one of these squares can actually draw the game, which is a little bit weird. I'll probably shoot a video about this later. But what I didn't realize while I was playing this game, because I had forgotten, is that only works if the pawn is actually on the 7th rank already and the rook is standing in front of the pawn, defending it from my rook being in back here, right? And then I don't remember what exactly this is called, but it's a type of defense that you can use to get a draw in this kind of game. And so that's why I was pushing for this kind of position so that I could get my rook behind the pawn on the edge, and I felt like this was going to be a draw. But it wasn't. And let's go back. As I said, I need to learn my my end games with the pawn on the edge of the board a little bit better. But there is actually a very simple idea here that would have helped me to draw. Now, there are some caveats to this, but the right move is Rook A4. And the idea is that I actually, instead of trading this pawn for this pawn, I want to trade this pawn for this pawn. And it's kind of obvious why that is if you've watched my video about the Philidor position. I'll link it up there. But the correct defense in Rook endgames often involves having your king in front of the pawn that's trying to make it down the board. The Philidor position, that's one of the requirements, is your king has to be in front of that pawn. And so if I can manage to trade this pawn for this pawn somehow, then my king is close to the remaining white pawn, and I can probably draw this endgame. So, for example, if, let's say, this king just moves off there, I can take, they can take, and then maybe I go after this pawn, and I get a check, but then my rook can come down here, and I'm attacking this pawn. Possibly bringing it in behind could work as well, but even something like this, I'm going to win this pawn, right? And, you know, there are some other potential lines where I can get into the actual Philidor position. In this line, the white rook managed to get on this rank before I did. And so different lines have different things, but this would have been a drawn endgame. And the point is, this is because my king is standing in front of this pawn. So let's go back for a second to here. If I play this move, I think I considered this move, but I didn't know what to do about this, King B3, because it looks like now the king is just defending and I'm going to end up losing this pawn anyway. But there's actually one move here, according to the engine, that still holds this draw. And it looks like a really terrible move, but it is rook a5. And this actually works because now I'm defending this pawn and I'm continuing to put pressure on the a2 pawn as well. So if the king comes down here, for example, then I just take this pawn, we trade, and now, once again, you know, I'm going to be able to defend this with my king so close to the remaining pawn. But, okay, what if now white does something like this, though? So now white is going to be able to bring their king while still keeping an eye on this pawn, right? But it turns out this is actually okay, because if I just play a waiting move, white brings their king. Now I can play rook a4 with a check. And now what is white going to do? White could capture my pawn with their king, but if they do, then I'm just going to capture theirs and we're in the same position. And if they move their king away, I just put my rook back and I'm maintaining the defense here and I'm maintaining the pressure here. And so this is kind of the whole idea. If we go all the way back to here, the idea here that draws the game is, instead of trying to trade this pawn for this pawn, as I've mentioned, we need to try to trade this pawn for this pawn. And the reason is because then my king is going to be able to stand in front of this pawn and probably it's a draw. Now, once again, learning the theory of when you have a pawn on the edge of the board is important, because there are, you know, different winning and drawing scenarios there. But in this case, I could have totally just brought it down to an endgame that I was familiar with and comfortable with, instead of this endgame that I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to be able to make a draw or not. So pretty quick video for you today. I hope that was helpful. I think it's pretty useful sometimes to see how these sort of theoretical endgames can actually, you know, be used, and how these ideas and concepts can be used in actual games, right? Because actual games are sometimes a little bit messy and they don't look exactly like the Philidor or Lucina positions, but you can use these ideas to steer things in a direction that can be advantageous to you. And I think this was a pretty good example of that. I mean, admittedly, an example where I didn't do that, but analyzing it afterward, it was interesting to see how I could have steered this into a better direction, into a drawn endgame. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Hope it was helpful for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it, and I will see you on the next one.